The Thistle Nebula. It's a place unlike any other. Hears about things are strange, see? Stranger than most places, or at least so I hear. It seems that in our little pocket of the galaxy, we have ourselves a propensity for the unexplained, and where there's mysteries to be solved, there's always been detectives to solve them. The job's real simple. I answer the call when's about I get it, and recently I got the call that might just be the hottest tip of my whole career. Detective, it was the commissioner. As soon as you get a chance, we need you over on Dine. There's been a murder. Alrighty, I'll be there lickety-split, I said, and while it wasn't my first murder case, and probably won't be my last, I was wholly unprepared for what I was about to get myself into. Now, Dine's always been a frightful place, one of the few spots in this godforsaken nebula that still sets my skin a-pricklin'. But no sooner did I step into that mansion than did my heebie-jeebies turn to stark terror as I saw the scene before me. It was like a picture from one of them horror flicks. Bodies everywhere. What we had before us wasn't no murder. It was a massacre. I never seen anything like it, and I hope I never do again. But it was my investigation after all. Where did all this come from? Whose body was it? And most important of all, who done it? This is the full lore of Lethal Company's version 73 and the mystery of the murder on Dine.
But before we get into that, this video is brought to you by today's sponsor, Opera GX. Chances are you've all heard of Opera GX before. It's a top-tier browser built for MVPs, not NPCs, and packs a host of great native features that propel web browsing from boring and sterile to fun, interesting, and most important of all, hassle-free. Featuring a built-in VPN and ad blocker, removing pesky pop-ups and obscuring your IP is simpler than ever before. I'm being serious when I tell you that this is probably one of the best ad blockers I've ever come across. In my experience, it even catches embeds that AdBlock Pro tends to miss. The VPN is excellent too. It's fast, reliable, and easy to forget you even have it on, which is sort of the idea. In addition, with the help of GX mods, your browser is nearly fully customizable. Change everything from your wallpaper to the sounds of your keys and clicks and beyond. You can even alter the font of the UI if you so desire. Now that's customizability. There are thousands of official and community-made mod packs to choose from, or you can mix and match in order to create the browsing experience that's perfect for you. But while all of that might sound great, Opera GX also understands that you're probably already pretty well settled into your current browser. But never fear, using the quick import tool, you can instantly migrate your settings, history, cookies, and even Chrome extensions over in just a couple of simple clicks, meaning there's no real setup required. Listen, as you can probably tell, Opera GX is a service I've used for a while, and it really is an excellent way to browse the web. So if all of that sounds interesting to you, then break up with your boring browser today and use my link in the description or pinned comment to get started with Opera GX for free. And by the way, until the end of 2025, you can get a month of VPN Pro free by using code EGGPLANT, so make sure to check that out too. Thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring this video, and with that, we've got a case to solve. Back in early October, a small Lethal Company update would be dropped out of the blue. Version 73. Initially framed as a very minor version improvement, there didn't seem to be much to get excited about here, and as stated by Zeekers in the official Steam listing, quote,
"Hello, I'm back with a minor security patch, so make sure to play on the newest version. I've also made adjustments to the scrap which can spawn on Dine, so you should check that out."
That was pretty much it. Understandably, by this description alone, most players wouldn't rush to see what all the commotion was about. But nevertheless, there were some indications, even here, that version 73 might be a bit more than would first meet the eye. Officially known as the Handy Patch, the thumbnail image used to represent the update would prominently feature a hand sculpt that we've never seen before. This was a completely unique asset, the likes of which didn't exist anywhere else in-game to this point. And yet, the only practical changes recorded were concerning Dine's loot pool, so that's where most employees would decide to check. And quickly, it was learned that the alterations here were pretty dramatically understated. As of version 73, visiting Dine will now reveal an interior filled with a palette of 10 scrap items, 8 of which are completely new. The foot, the tongue, the ear, the rib cage, the bone, the knee, the heart, and of course, the hand. All unique items exclusive to this moon, and aside from these vivisected corpse parts, only whoopee cushions and Easter eggs can now be found here. Perhaps just as interesting as the macabre state of the loot itself, though, if you can even call it that, is the sheer volume of it to be found, since following this new update, anywhere between 200 and 250 items are now set to spawn on the moon, making it by far the most loot-dense world in the company's known purview. But the question to all of this, ever since its addition, has been, why? Why is this here? How is it significant? Is it significant at all? And although I know it's been a little while since this content has dropped, I wanted to take some time to briefly explore the ramifications that all of this seems to have on the lore of not only Dine, but the creatures that inhabit it. See, Dine has always been a strange moon, and one with a particularly turbulent history at that. In the earliest phase of Lethal Company's release, Dine shared a very similar theme and layout to its sister moon, Rend, which quickly caused it to become overshadowed for the majority of the player base. There was nothing altogether unique about the moon in this state, so when version 50 would release, Zeekers would completely reinvent the layout of Dine in order to make it a more unique and approachable location. At around the same time, its spawn pool would be revamped to include a slightly more unique palette of creatures as opposed to other worlds, prominently featuring one of the new enemies at the time, the Butler, in much higher abundance than could be found elsewhere, which is something that seems fairly significant again in light of our recent developments. The Butler is one of the more difficult to understand creatures in Lethal Company lore. Some time ago, I made a video on this very topic, and interestingly, even though that upload is close to a year old at this point, our knowledge surrounding this thing has barely changed. One of the most interesting things about the Butler lore-wise is that they're one of the only enemies which we can safely classify as supernatural in some regard, or more specifically, undead. Their forms are squat, bloated, and humanoid, immediately portraying an air of age that's uncanny, made all the more so by the sounds of insects buzzing within their bodies. Of course, both the sound and deflated appearance of the Butler can be explained by the fact that they are literally rotting from the inside out, infested by insects known as mask hornets, which burst forth in the event that the Butler is killed, leaving behind nothing but a mass of withered skin and the pressed suit worn by the creature in its unnatural life. It's fitting that a creature so intimately entwined with the idea of rot and decay is now so prominently featured in an area littered with the severed parts of the dead. But the Butler's behavior is also significant. When greeted by 2 or more players simultaneously, the Butler is a passive encounter. It merely mulls about, sweeping the floors and making busy while employees go about their work. But underneath the mask of disinterest, Butlers are very hostile. And should they catch a player alone, it won't take long for them to withdraw a kitchen knife from inside their suit and relentlessly pursue wayward company workers. Upon killing an employee, Butlers have also been known to hide their mess, sweeping up the blood using their broom, and potentially even hiding corpses elsewhere in the building. So, all of a sudden, the volume of bodies being found here starts to make a bit more sense. Could it be that the corpses we find around the mansion on Dine are simply the decomposing remains of the Butler's many victims? If so, this might offer some insight into just how vast the network of company employees actually is. There are hundreds of severed parts here, all of which are in varying states of decay. The existence of bones speaks to the fact that some of these bodies might be older than others, but clearly there have been hundreds of casualties. Could the Butler be to blame? And moreover, while it's not uncommon to see flies swarming around rotting meat, such as is the case with a lot of these loot items, could these insects themselves be an allusion to the mask hornets? Maybe what we're seeing here aren't flies at all, but infant hornets growing and preparing to infest a Butler form for themselves. Of course, that's all speculation, but it is indicative of a larger trend that we're going to be seeing throughout the rest of this video. The bodies on Dine definitely don't exist in a vacuum, and the Butler is not necessarily the only enemy that could have had a hand in this murder. Shortly after Dine's rework in version 50, one of Lethal Company's most infamous updates would release. Version 55 brought with it staples of the game such as the company cruiser and a small collection of new enemies. But not long after its release, this version of the game would also see one of its most major features completely retconned out of existence. That feature, of course, was the Kidnapper Fox, and the phenomenon involving this update is something I've also talked about on the channel before. But what's often forgotten about version 55 is that there was another enemy added here, one that, while it may have been overshadowed by the situation involving the fox, has actually stuck around in-game even to this day, though owing to a number of circumstances surrounding it, it has been largely forgotten. That enemy, of course, is the Barber. The Barber is a very odd creature, likely one of the strangest in the game, and it's hard to deny that the unorthodox circumstances surrounding its inclusion have only contributed to the air of mystery surrounding it. First off, the Barber is exceedingly rare, appearing at a far lesser rate than nearly any other creature in the game, but its infrequent appearances aren't helped by the fact that it's been largely exiled to Dine, appearing here almost exclusively, and further entrenching the moon's reputation as a sort of sepulcher or holding ground for some of the strangest elements in the game. The gimmick of the Barber is rather simple, but you'd be forgiven for not being completely aware of it given the creature's aforementioned rarity. In short, it's notable for being almost completely invisible to the naked eye, at least from a distance. But when a player gets closer, it'll quickly pop into view, revealing a bluish-purple figure molded from some as-of-yet unknown substance, wielding a massive, oversized pair of scissors. It moves using a sort of stop-motion gimmick, where it only proceeds forward at a set rhythm, which makes its movements slightly easier to track in spite of its near invisibility. It's a very strange creature, for which virtually no information exists, owing to the fact that even its bestiary entry contains nothing more than an odd, nondescript poem. And yet, even with as little as one encounter with this thing under your belt, it's not hard to see how the Barber's mere presence could definitely serve to implicate it in Dine's murders. Let's once again consider the state of the bodies found on this moon starting with version 73. These remains aren't pulled apart, they're severed, found in deliberate pieces throughout the mansion, and clearly, whoever or whatever did this wasn't working at random. These pieces were separated cleanly, using some kind of implement perhaps not unlike the giant scissors wielded by the Barber. So could it be that the situation unfolding here is actually the work of not one, but two killers? Maybe what we're seeing is the work of the unholy duo of Barber and Butler, both luring and hunting employees in their own way, eventually leading to the scene we find ourselves with today. It's definitely an intriguing thought, and there's more than enough circumstantial evidence to consider both of these enemies as important parts of the unfolding story here. But there is still one major elephant in the room we have left to discuss. What if these aren't the bodies of employees at all? The uncomfortable reality of a moon like Dine is just how little we actually know about its history and lore. The prevailing narrative seems to be that, just like over on Rend, a series of mansions were constructed here in order to appeal to the tastes or needs of the elite. In the distant past, before the Thistle Nebula fell into its current state of abandonment, these moons seem to have been far, far removed from the rest of civilized life, and combined with their harsh terrain and climate, it's difficult to imagine that a place this remote would appeal to that many spacefaring denizens. Nevertheless, what we can infer beyond any reasonable doubt is that on a world where mansions are the most prominent type of interior, somebody must have lived here at some point in time, and though the names of these denizens may have been lost to time, there is a theory that we might be familiar with at least one of those former inhabitants. The Ghost Girl is a particularly anomalous enemy, not only because of its complete lack of documentation anywhere in universe, but also because of how out of place she feels compared to most of the other beasts of the Thistle Nebula. The Ghost Girl joins the likes of the Butler as perhaps one of the only legitimately, verifiably paranormal entities in the game, and a good part of what makes her so striking is how out of place she feels in the majority of Lethal Company's environments. Indeed, the Ghost Girl doesn't seem to fit anywhere. The spirit of such a young child feels out of place in the factory, the mineshaft, and in the outdoor areas of most moons. But the one place where she is a believable part of the environment is, of course, the mansion. And while the Ghost Girl does not have her highest spawn rate on Dine, that honor actually belongs to Rend, unless you count the unimplemented moon Liquidation, which I probably should make a video about at some point. Nevertheless, I think it's clear that there is an ontological correlation here, which brings me to my final and easily my most outlandish theory regarding the Dine murders. What if at least a portion of these bodies once belonged to the denizens of the mansion itself, of which the Ghost Girl may have once belonged? In the past, I've theorized that enemies like the Barber and the Jester may have been created as biological weapons similar in nature to the Coilhead and likely the Nutcracker. Each of these enemies shares a similar theme, masquerading as a toy or novelty item of some kind, and it's pretty well established lore at this point that weapons such as these, if they did indeed exist, have played a key role in several interstellar conflicts in the history of the Thistle Nebula. So who's to say that what we're seeing here isn't merely the ramifications of one of those very conflicts? What if the Barber was sent to infiltrate a hideaway of an important individual, slaughtered the denizens of the mansion, and left us with the scene we have today? Maybe the most interesting part of this interpretation is that it could even recontextualize the Ghost Girl's hauntings. What if she isn't a vengeful spirit like we've come to believe, but is instead trying to warn us, to scare us away from meeting with the same fate as her and her family? It's an interesting thought, though likely an imperfect one considering that such an explanation doesn't offer us a lot of insight into why the Ghost Girl would attempt to kill us herself. But who knows, maybe there's something I've missed, or undoubtedly more likely, it's certainly possible that none of this could be related to the Dine murders whatsoever. And yet, I think that's kind of the most interesting part of all of this. The most important thing to highlight here, in my opinion at least, is just how interesting and cool the implementation of the corpses on Dine really is, not only from a gameplay perspective, but also from the perspective of lore and theory crafting. As we've mentioned several times throughout this video, Dine is an incredibly mysterious moon, arguably one of, if not the single most mysterious in the entirety of Lethal Company, and it's always been special to me for precisely that reason. It's a world that exists in the fringe of our subconscious, a holding cell for some of the most unexplainable and cast-off elements of Lethal Company's history, an environment that's morphed and changed over the entire span of its existence, and one that, until recently, only ever existed as a footnote in the minds of a lot of players. Dine is a world that's utterly uninterpretable. It practically begs to be theorized over, and I think, more than anything else, that's by design. I've spent an admittedly embarrassing amount of time speculating on the world and lore of Lethal Company, and yet every time I tackle this moon, every time I think back on it, something feels deliberately incomplete. I think that's how it's supposed to be, a dark moon with a dark past that perhaps we're never meant to fully understand. Maybe, at the end of the day, there is no culprit behind the Dine murders at all. Maybe it's just another uncanny addition meant to add a layer of intrigue that we'll simply never get to the bottom of. This game, man, something about this world really is perfect, and part of me hopes that no matter what Zeekers intends to do with it, it'll never truly be understood. Some things are just better left that way, buried beneath the ice. This is Everberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.